right, Dean Setlow, how are you doing this morning?
I'm well. How are you? And Jen is fine. I'm not the
Okay,
most formal person in the world.
all right, wonderful. Well, Jen, thank you so much for agreeing to do the interview this morning. And as you
Sure.
know, we have interviewed Lucinda and Dawn, and it's really just a fascinating, series of interviews. And
Yeah.
we're really trying to get a sense of the development of, both the College of Fine Arts, College of Arts, the
Right.
role of arts at UF, and
Mhm.
higher education and the broader society. And so I don't know if you've had the chance to look at the first couple,
I
but
have not, unfortunately.
it's been definitely a learning
Yeah.
experience for me and for Deborah. And I know you have a very busy schedule as well. So why don't we just go ahead and kind of dive into it? Um, and as you know, we kind of start out with, a little formulaic. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us your, kind of intellectual academic biography and maybe, kind of some of your early, kind of academic training, as you started your academic career out.
Sure. So, I started doing theater in fourth grade. Not exactly my early academic training. I had a really fantastic teacher who introduced us to Shakespeare. And so we did Macbeth in fourth grade. Like you do. There's apparently a version for young people. Um, It was the 80s. It was a very different time. And I really fell in love with acting. And I did quite a bit of acting and did that throughout high school and was able to, we had a wonderful person who ran the drama club. And then when he had to step away, we were able to sort of pull together and keep it running. Um, and off I went to college, like so many of us do. And I thought, well, I'm either going to study theater or plant genetics, and I don't know which one. And within about the first 2 weeks, I realized that clearly it was going to be theater. But I grew up in what was at that time a relatively small town. We didn't have a lot of resources in our high school. And so I didn't really even know that theatrical design existed. Um, I sort of knew what it was, but I didn't know it was a thing you could study. Uh, and there I was as a theater major, and I took my first design class, and I thought, oh, this is phenomenal. This is it. This is what I want to study. Um, and I had a really fantastic design professor who was incredibly encouraging. Um, I think, and also, at a time when it still wasn't enormously easy for women to break into the profession, easier than it was for the generation before, but he was phenomenal about lifting up his students and making sure that we had opportunities. And so, you know, did my undergrad, went off to Minneapolis, spent 4 years there working for Theatre de la Jeune Lune, which was, there were not many more exciting places to work than that particular theater when I was there. And Minneapolis, of course, is an incredible place to be, arts and culture and all of that. Um, and then after 4 years of that winter, I thought perhaps grad school somewhere warm. Um, and I went on to UC San Diego, got my MFA there. And one of the things that really attracted me to the program there is that, I think for the majority of MFA programs, the students in a design program do a lot of work in the theater, right? And that's their assistantship, their hanging lights, their focusing lights. But I had been being paid to do that for 4 years, and I didn't want my assistantship to be something that I was already doing professionally, designing and also being a technician. Um, and San Diego had you teach. That was your assistantship, right? You might grade at first or assist a professor, but they were really clear that at that moment in time, because of La Jolla Playhouse is on the campus there, and their relationship with La Jolla Playhouse, the graduate students did not, unless they were doing a show outside of the school, do the physical labor. Um, and I really liked teaching. Um, and I thought, okay, well, let's hang on to that. I've got great experience, right? And so finished graduate school, was very, very fortunate to be in a place like San Diego where there were so many wonderful opportunities. Um, and I was designing like crazy. And so I stayed and I worked there, I guess for about 5 years. and decided, okay, I think I'm ready. I'm interested in a university job. I really, I had been teaching part-time or, just picking up a class here and there. I'd done quite a bit of mentorship of younger designers. And I loved it, right? I wanted to keep designing, but I loved teaching. I also was pretty excited about the idea of having some sort of stability in my life, which can be very challenging to do when you're working in a gig economy like most designers do. Um, and my first position was at Arizona State, and it was, again, a fantastic place to be. Um, Linda Essig, who's now the provost at Baruch, was the department chair when I was hired in what was then the School of Theater and Film. Um, and went through the sort of normal assistant professor trajectory, but people kept giving me extra jobs. Um, Apparently I was organized. And so, within I think my second year, I started running a degree program. My maybe third or fourth year, I got elected as secretary of the academic assembly. Like people just kept asking me to do things. And then I took on a role coordinating things in my department and, got tenure. And a year later, they came and said, "Hi, would you like to be associate dean for students? We need you to start next week." And, I thought, well, okay. And I said yes. Again, it was an exciting time to be there. Stephen Tepper, who just left there to go to Hamilton, was the dean, and he had just been hired. And so I did that for 3 years. I was the associate dean for students for over 5,000 students, responsible for everything that touched those students from the time they showed up to have their sort of orientation experience, and to some degree for the recruitment, all the way through when I shook their hand and handed them their diploma cover when they walked across the stage. That was my half-time job. The other half-time job was being the lighting professor. And after about 3 years of that, I thought, perhaps another job. It was fantastic, right? I couldn't have had better coworkers. But again, I was ready for a change and some work-life balance. And that was when I applied to the job here at the University of Florida and came here.
Yeah, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking a step
Yeah.
back, to when you were talking fourth grade
Yeah.
in Macbeth, and obviously you'd go on to do more performance, and then at a certain point, you
Right.
decided to really transition into design. Could you talk about that? Because most people are just not familiar with what
Sure.
goes on. I mean, obviously you're an award-winning designer, but people will go to a play or musical and they just
Right.
kind of assume that everything just was there already. Can you talk about like why you made that decision? Like what excited you about a design in particular?
Absolutely. So, I had some sort of very messy and unmentored experience with costume and scenic design in high school. At the time, the only people who were allowed to touch the lights were the AV club, and the gentleman who ran the AV club. And so again, as I said, I didn't really even know what was possible. Um, and in that first design class, I realized that this was sort of everything I loved about theater, right? They're digging into the story, the storytelling, the, exploration of how you put together this complete world on a stage when you start with usually either just choreography, because I'd done quite a bit of work with dance as well, or words on a page, right? And how do you take that from a words on a page to a world? It was everything that I loved about the performance aspect of that, but there was this whole other intellectual piece of it that to me was really engaging, right? It was thinking about, because the design process, I think, is a little bit, it can be challenging for people to even just think about how would you do that? How do you go from like, here's the script and here's the set. Well, how do you figure out what the lights are going to look like? Um, And it really is just like anything else, but it was that ability you would sit and instead of developing the character, you're figuring out what does this world look like? How does light function in this particular world? How does it move? What's the tempo of it? What are the tonalities of it? How does it make the people look? How do you make sure that in the moment in time when something really important is happening here, that everybody's not looking over here? And all of those ways that so it was like taking everything I loved about acting and everything I'd enjoy. I really love painting, but I'm terrible at it. And so I had always enjoyed doing it, but recognized that I was terrible at it. So it was like painting, but with a tool that I could actually control. And in a way that was about telling a story in time. Even if it was the story of how do you support a particular piece of choreography, or there's a transition happening and I need you to not look over there. Um, and so, of course, that first class really was everything from this is a light and this is how you hang it safely. But again, having a really great design professor who was like, this is a script. This is how you think about what the story needs in terms of telling that story. And it was just, I was like, I didn't even know you could do this for a living. My mother for many, many years got asked like, oh, well, what's Jennifer doing? And she would say, well, she's a lighting designer now. And they would say, oh, they move those lights between shows, which I think is a pretty typical response. Um, but it is, it's the most magical moment, I think, in in that sort of period of time between when rehearsals are largely finished and you're moving into the theater and technical rehearsals, is the first moment when people see the lights come on stage, right? Because you're sitting there and you're seeing the set and the costumes and all the people, and it's under work light, which is usually fluorescent, or now, of course, it would be LED, and it's just flat and it's ugly and nothing looks the way it ought to. And then the lights come on, the stage lights, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, oh, I understand it. Um, and that's, I had been designing for several years, and I was doing a production of a piece called Crowns with one of my favorite directors, Patro Harris. And there's a particular scene in there that takes place in a backwoods church, a backwoods African American church at a particular time period in the South. And I had done like huge amounts of historical research to understand what would the light look like, what would the windows be, what shape were they, all of the sort of normal things a designer would do. And I brought up the lights for that scene, and one of the actors came running up to me and she was like, how did you know what my church looked like? How did you know that? And I thought, okay, I'm doing my job, right? I'm getting it right.
That is so cool. Well, I wanted to ask you kind of selfishly about a couple other um, experiences, production experiences a bit later, but I realized, Jen, I interrupted your kind of academic
Fine.
trajectory. So you were at the Associate Dean for Students
Mhm.
for several years at Arizona State University at the Institute for Design and Arts. And how did you decide to make the jump from there to here, or I guess University of Florida, I should say? Yeah.
Yeah. So there were a handful of different things. One was that the position where Herberger Institute is so big, it's grown so much since I left, right? It's huge. And so you had, one associate dean that handled student affairs and one associate dean that handled very much faculty affairs, and then another one that handled research. So it was very split out. And there really wasn't any opportunity for me to learn something new necessarily. I had spent 3 years working really hard and learning about how to be this associate dean for students. And so, first of all, the UF position was one that allowed me to sort of meld student affairs with faculty affairs, which was really interesting to me. Because I thought, well, when you really completely separate those out, how do you really understand what either hand is doing, right? How do you understand faculty affairs if you don't understand what's happening with curriculum? Um, so that was one piece of it, is I wanted a place where I could grow. Another piece, I happen to have a lot of colleagues who went to the University of Florida and had incredibly fond memories of their experiences here. And my brother and sister-in-law are also at the University of Florida. And that was very appealing, right? My brother and I had not lived in the same state since my senior year of high school. Um, and and I knew, of course, I knew who Lucinda was, from her, some of the talks she had given, things like that. And Bobby Corner, who was the interim dean for, I think, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I can't remember, before Lucinda, had actually been my mentor at the ATHA, the Association for Theater and Higher Education Leadership Institute. And again, spoke very highly of, the University of Florida. It was in some ways, another large institution. It had that sort of same breadth of disciplines. The Digital Worlds Institute was here. Of course, I came from a place where we had arts, media, and engineering. So it had all of the really cool pieces. And conveniently, I could see my brother and sister-in-law and my niece and nephew. So, yeah.
Excellent. What were some of the challenges, Jen, as you transition to the University of Florida, in terms of both, kind of this new position, but also, one of the documents that Lucinda shared with me earlier was the Creative Campus Initiative, and talking about, some of the challenges of really making sure the arts are the centerpiece of the University of Florida. Could you talk about that?
I can a little bit. I think one of the, I would say, just very frankly, the biggest challenge my first year was, I moved out here and promptly my dean told me she was retiring. Um, and then I found out I was pregnant. So that was a very exciting first year. So we were recruiting our next dean, and I was chairing a search committee and also, gestating a child all at the same time. And so I think, you know, the biggest challenge for me was that the state of Arizona is so different in the way that it handles higher education. Florida has really strong structures that are very top down. There's tends to be a lot of legislation around higher education. There's the Board of Governors, there's a Board of Trustees, there's a lot of intense oversight. And I think because of the level of state funding that we get, there's also a little bit of a different relationship there. In Arizona, the money is handled a little differently. I believe at this point, ASU doesn't even take state appropriations. And so I think it's a little easier to be entrepreneurial there, and it's a little easier to be nimble and flexible because there are just fewer legislative rules about higher education. It's just a different environment, right? It's, people do things one way or another. So getting sort of comfortable with the rhythms of how UF moves and becoming a little bit more patient about the time it took to get things done was one thing. And I think, another was that I had come from a place where, while I was there, the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts was actually formed, and my own unit had gone from being the School of Theater and Film to the School of Film, Dance, and Theater, and now they're the School of Music, Dance, and Theater because film split off and became the Sidney Poitier New American Film School. And so I was accustomed to a level of intersection, I think, that isn't immediately available at UF. I think that there are still an awful lot of people on this campus who don't know that we teach theater here.
Hmm.
Which consistently fascinates me. And so in some ways, the bigger challenge was not making sure that the arts are constantly, present and visible and centered. It really sometimes was just reminding people that we exist. And the other big challenge is the regularly reminding people that the arts are not here to decorate your work.
Hmm.
And the arts are not here just to tell the story of your work, which is, I think, a very common perception of, oh, that's so great. We'll do an art science collaboration and arts will tell our story. Like that's great. Like that's a thing, yes, we can do, but we are also equal collaborators in research and can bring something really new to the table. And so one of the things that I think helped get me hired here was the fact that I came in saying, well, yes, there should be an artist or designer on every grant because we bring something new to the table. We will think of things that you will not think of, and vice versa. So that, I think, in some ways has been the bigger challenge, is just constantly saying, hey, not only are we here, but we actually can change how you think about research.
Yeah. Theater and the arts, it's not just something to do on weekends.
No, no, it's not. And it's not just pretty, right? And I think that it gets very easy. Oh, that's so great that you have a College of the Arts. Can your students come play at my, my event? Yes, we love that. That's awesome. But, have you also taken a look at the incredible work that, is happening in the world around music and brain wellness? Like there's so much more than just enjoying looking at or hearing a performance or an installation, right? I we had a really fantastic design graduate student who did this amazing thesis project on using what she had learned and using design to help people understand that a living shoreline is a better way to handle things like storm surge and hurricanes than a hard shoreline,
Hmm. Wow.
right? Like,
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I would never have thought of that.
Yeah.
Not that kind of a designer, but also what a fantastic way to think about what design can bring to the table. And it was everything from, the what, she had learned in her program was helping her with not just producing the materials that would convince, but it's about understanding the process of how you work with people, how you collaborate, how you connect with communities. And so that has been, my one of sort of my biggest pushes to make sure that we carry on with this is just helping people understand that the arts are not just entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, they're that too, which is awesome. There's nothing wrong with entertainment, but it's more than that.
Yes. Well, Jen, earlier you had talked about, as you began moving into um, kind of administrative leadership in higher education, these connections, looking at my notes between curriculum and the faculty and kind of faculty development as well. And you mentioned in your biography that you helped to, as an associate dean, I was speaking of something that most people are not familiar with, like what is an associate dean,
Right.
Um, but your time as an associate dean was really important in the College of the Arts because you helped to redesign and expand the support series for both tenure and promotion, as well as new faculty onboarding. Can you kind of talk about that aspect of your work?
Sure. So let me go back in time just a little bit. So I to some degree ended up in academic administration, partially because I'm really organized and good at getting things done, great at spreadsheets. But it was also because, you know, the the student population at Arizona State is very, very different from the student population at UF, right? It's an access institution, which means there's a lot of students that are first generation, low income, working 40 plus hours a week, unhoused, food insecure, right? And so I was really interested in what are the systems you can create to support people, but also to give them access, right? So I had learned a huge amount about, and because I'm from an academic family, you know, in a upper middle class town, like all of these things so that this is the language of academia is the language I grew up hearing at the dinner table. And so a lot of my sort of early digging in was like, okay, there are so many of us on the faculty and even on the staff who speak that language. How do you make sure that the students have what they need to even ask the questions, right? What are the questions they don't even know to ask? And I got here, and I took a look and I thought, I'm learning UF's tenure and promotion processes and policies and all of this. Wonder where the information is. So I was like, okay, the university does a training. Wonder how accessible that is to our faculty. And I started thinking about, well, what about our first generation faculty? What about the people who don't know what questions to ask? And I had sort of a lot of really interesting ancillary conversations with people around, particularly around the packet. Well, if the person can't write a wonderful packet, well, why are we giving them a promotion? And I thought, boy, a lot of my people aren't here to write, right? They're not. They're embodied. their work is embodied. And so, I would like to see many of you who have said that thing to me get out there and choreograph a piece or dance at all, you know. And so I got really interested in what are the steps along the way? Like, first of all, what are the moments in time when you need to make sure that faculty have the information they need to understand what's the arc of the process? What are the things that you need to pay attention to? What information should you be saving? How does this thing work? There are 34 sections in our tenure and promotion packet. How do you begin to unpack that as a first-time assistant professor or a first-time instructional professor, like instructional assistant professor? How do you even begin? Usually when I say 34, people get this look in their eyes like, ah, 34? Why is it? And, and then how do you help the people who have come from an institution where the goal of the third year review is to weed out almost everyone? Understand that this is meant to actually help you. How do you help keep them here? How do you help people write narratives when you've been your whole life encouraged not to talk about yourself or talk about yourself as good at something? And how do you help people talk about their work to people who don't even know that you exist at this university? And so that was kind of where the expansion of the series came from. Was, it started with, I was like, okay, well, let's do a tenure and promotion workshop. And I was like, because that we had been doing one for years, and I thought that's not enough. And so it grew from there into a tenure and promotion workshop, and then we started offering it multiple times per year, and a mid-career review workshop, and then a narrative writing workshop. And I discovered that if you did, a couple of them in the fall and a couple of them in the spring, and then made yourself really available to run the training again or record it if people needed it, all of a sudden, people were showing up, and they were showing up sometimes in their first year of employment, which meant that from year one, they were collecting all the things they would need. They knew how to find their criteria. They knew how to understand, where do I need to look in the collective bargaining agreement, because we're an in-unit college, to really see the details of this process. Hey, if it's a bargaining year, what should I be paying attention to around that process? Where are the regulations? Where's the information? Who do I ask questions of? And one of the most common ones, where the heck do I put that thing? Which, the template has to serve everyone at the university. And so I had a very entertaining experience once with a staff member who's no longer here, who was working on administering tenure and promotion. And I had asked a question about, said, residencies are a real honor, but they also come with a financial award, and there's something you have to apply for. Would you think that we would more normally put these in honors, or could we put them under, sponsored funding brought in? And they were like, shouldn't that go under education? I was like, oh, let me explain what a residency is when I talk about the College of the Arts. And so that was kind of the growth of that, right? The goal was to take a process that, as a junior faculty member at the time, when I was going up for tenure, I think I had like a workshop. I had a fantastic mentor, but I had like one workshop. I didn't know how the process worked. And I grew up in an academic family, right? Like, I didn't know what all the sections were, or what this meant or that meant. I thought, let's just make it all really obvious, right? The more we can tell people. And the really cool outgrowth of that was that the faculty who came to the workshops would then reach out to me and say, hey, could you read my narratives? And I would always make that, hey, I will read your narratives. I will review them. I will give you notes. I will make suggestions. Let's look at your packet. I'll help you organize your materials. Because for basically everyone, I could look and say, hey, I don't understand that, and I'm your associate dean. Or, hey, I don't think you're really talking about yourself enough. And so that was sort of how that series grew. The new faculty onboarding, the growth in that series came when my then colleague, Tony Kalenic, and I looked at each other one day. I think it was my second year. And at that point, our new faculty onboarding was a lunch. And we were like, wow, no, we're not doing this again. And so we sat down and we said, okay, what are the things faculty need to know about? Well, they need to get a big, broad introduction to the college, because when you get here, it's like a fire hose, right? You don't know who anybody is. You don't know how to get anything done, and you don't know who to ask for anything. So the series would position us, so we would start with one that's like a broad introduction to here's the College of the Arts, and here's like the 3 things we need you to remember so that you don't get in trouble. Like, don't pay people for work they haven't done yet, and other exciting things like that. But also, who do I go to for questions, right? And then we would spend a session walking through what is the tenure and promotion process, trying to sneak that into the onboarding as well. And Chris Haas was great. He gave us quite a bit of material from the university perspective that I think helps people really frame the packet as storytelling, which makes it less, it just makes it less intimidating when you really think about it as the story of why you're awesome. So we did this one on tenure and promotion, and then we would spend 2 on teaching. And it was really about helping people understand what are the resources at UF. So we have great stuff from the Center for Teaching Excellence and CITT and all of these places, but also what are the opportunities out there, right? What is Quest and how does it work? At that time, it was what is the good life? All of the other, what are the opportunities for teaching something really cool in honors? How do you develop a new course? Where do you even start? And then 2 sessions on research, 1 session on service as power, which had a lot to do with the kinds of service you can do and how to choose them to help you get where you want to go in your career. And later on, we ended up adding a session on how to be a successful mentee, because we realized that, with all the focus that the university was putting on mentoring, they didn't really put a lot of focus on menteeing and how, as a mentee, to advocate for yourself and your own needs. So that is where it was when I left it and stepped mid-year into the interim dean role. And I think Marshall Haining has taken it on and is doing fantastic things with it. But that's, again, it was sort of, we started with the basics, right? Teaching, research, and service. And you really need to know about tenure and promotion. And it kind of just flexes based on what our faculty need. And during COVID, it became a flipped classroom model where we just would pre-record all the sessions, and that way you come back to it, because again, living in the fire hose is really hard. And then folks would just get together on a Friday to ask questions. And so it gave us an opportunity to build community when we were all remote. But again, I think a lot of it is that same thing, right? That you don't know what you don't know. And when you don't know where to find things, it can be incredibly intimidating. And having a place where you can get answers, even if it's something as small as like, how do you get a plumber to return your phone call in Gainesville? Which is really, that's a great question. Having that expanded onboarding series, I think, became really valuable. As I said, both in terms of community, but in terms of locating the associate deans, because it's typically given by both of our associate deans, as the folks who know how to answer questions and who it's totally fine to reach out to if you have a question and don't know who to ask. And they will happily find who you can ask if they don't know the answer themselves.
Well, Jen, it's so inspiring listening to you detail this incredibly transparent process, because, in terms of tenure promotion, I think a lot of us, as we kind of go through our intellectual careers, at a certain point, forget how difficult it is. You alluded to this, when you start, you're a brand new assistant professor, you may or may not have an academic background. And it just seems to me most of the places that I've written, even, writing tenure letters or doing evaluations of departments, it's often assumed that junior people just know where, how to get the plumber to return their call, or how to, how to like make notations on their CVs and stuff.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. And that is, like I said, that is really what pulled me into administration was, I am fascinated by systems. I'm a complete systems nerd. And I am most interested in how we can use systems to make things transparent, to get rid of barriers to people, and, and how we can interrogate them to see, who is this system setting up for success and who
Yeah,
is it not, right? And how can you make sure that it's setting everybody up for success, whether their background is contemporary dance or, musicology.
exactly. Well, you mentioned it was interesting. A couple more questions here about the process, but I remember when I was president of the faculty union at UF and talking to Chris Haas and some other folks in the provost's office, they actually gained a very positive experience and view of the collective bargaining contract. And, on more than one occasion, they mentioned to me, before we had this, and these are some of the older folks, before we had this, we didn't really have a process, And so
Yeah,
in many ways, that collective bargaining agreement, and you know this from your earlier experience with the United Scenic Artists,
yeah,
provides a framework, kind of an
right,
understanding,
right.
accountability that
Yeah.
it's easy to take for granted.
Yeah, it's, and again, I came from a university that doesn't have a faculty, at that time did not have a faculty union. And that was actually one of the things that attracted me to UF. Even though, when I'm in the associate dean role, it's actually my job to be the person who hears the first round of any grievances, was that, again, I have this very specific memory. We were rewriting our something for the institute. It was a big mission statement, something like this, what we wanted to do moving forward, and it had come to a vote, and someone said, "Now you've all got to remember that this is advisory only." And I thought, why are we voting if it's advisory only? Why is this foundational document for our institution, our piece of the institution? Why are we not able to make that decision on it, right? And that really stuck with me. And I was like, oh, you have a strong faculty union. Tell me more about that.
Right. Well, one of the questions about the tenure and promotion process, and I think that both Lucinda and Don touched briefly on this, but I wanted to see if I could get more details. Could you talk about some of are there challenges between, say, your specific departments in the college, then the college, and then the office of the provost, in terms of explaining along the lines, this is how a faculty member in the arts, gains tenure, gets promoted. Have you ever seen kind of a little bit of challenges in explaining that as you kind of go up the food chain, or?
I really haven't. I will say I think, Lucinda did such a fantastic job laying the groundwork. But our unit's criteria are, and again, they're always evolving. They're clear and they're specific. And we have not had challenges to the idea that we are the experts in knowing whether or not someone, deserves the thing that they are going up for. Again, I think Chris has been great about, when he doesn't understand something, he reaches out and asks a question. Hey, can you explain this to me so I can explain it? But I do also think that the really deep work that we've done in the college in terms of helping our faculty understand that every single section of the packet has to tell the story of why you're awesome in words that anyone can understand, has really paid off. And that is usually the first set of notes that people get back is, I don't know what these 8 words mean, and neither will the theoretical physicist who's going to review your packet at the academic personnel board. And so from that very first time when you're in the onboarding session, we talk to people about how you frame your language for an internal audience versus for an external audience. Who are the people who need to read your packet before you ever turn it in? Me, yes. Peers in your unit, that's up to you, right? Like you are the person who owns this. You get to decide. But please have people read it who know nothing about your discipline, because they will tell you, I don't know what that is. I don't understand that. Oh, is that important? Um, And I genuinely do think that that work and that our unit directors have been great about also working very closely with their faculty, with the people who are mentoring faculty to say, hey, if you are not translating it, nobody will understand it because it isn't, it's such an interesting place, right? Because so it helps to know almost everyone in my family but me is a scientist. Um, it's just a thing. So yeah, brother, sister-in-law, mother, father, several grandparents, lots of scientists, and of course, I think it tends to be a little bit more quantitative, right? You need to have a certain amount of grant dollars, a certain number of papers. It's a little easier to put numbers on some of these things. It's not exactly an exact, match 1-to-1, but people aren't necessarily going to understand why does it matter that you did a show at the Old Globe or the Alley? Why does that venue matter? Why does it matter that you had an exhibition here or there? And so we've also been training our unit directors to explain in their letters why things matter. Um, and so we've been really successful I think because our faculty are awesome, but we've been really, really successful, and we have not had any situation where our faculty's research was not understood as being as excellent as it is.
Jen, if you don't mind me asking, you had alluded to earlier, you know, we all inhabit different types of institutions. We've taught and learned in different types of institutions. There are certain types of institutions, I won't go into any names, in which faculty are often hired as junior people with the assumption that they'll probably will not get tenure no matter what they do.
Right.
Could you talk about your, kind of the hiring process, because you've been a key leader at the University of Florida in bringing in amazing new folks. Could you talk about like the philosophy that you try to pursue in hiring new colleagues at UF?
Sure. I think it's one thing that's important to know about our college is that, we don't, if someone retires or steps away, that doesn't automatically mean that you get to replace that person, right? You need to explain the why of it and what is really needed. And I don't say that to be like, ha 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 ha, I control the money. But it really is about a deep understanding that just because we needed something 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, doesn't mean we need exactly that thing right now. So tell me about what you need right now. Come back, right? And ask, and don't just say, I need a replacement for that person, because that tells me nothing. So our hiring process really starts, I think we have a couple of things that we do as a college. Our college mission goes into all of our job postings, and we do have a minimum qualification where we ask people to really talk about essentially their ability to function in complex cultural and human situations. That's the without all the extra words version of what it is. And we ask people questions about that when they visit. But our general philosophy starts with, if we are hiring someone, we're making an investment in them, and we really want them to stay. Now, of course, sometimes, you move along and you learn that maybe something's not a great fit for either for us or sometimes for the faculty member. Maybe we're not the right fit for them. But if we're investing in someone and we're investing the money to bring them here, sometimes with their family, that's an investment, right? And so, I don't know that our hiring process looks so different. Maybe our job descriptions look a little different than any other unit, but we do have, we try to have multiple levels of thoughtful review on the position description, right? There can be no knee-jerk minimum qualifications. I think for many years you would see things like not just terminal degree, but a terminal degree from a certain kind of institution. Well, why? Why does that matter? What does that mean? What does that actually get you, right? And people would ask, like, these were just very honest questions, like, do we should we rank them based on where they got their terminal degree? I said, no, actually, no, you should not. Because not everybody has access to the same institutions. And so it really, we did a lot of work, particularly under Dina Zuzu, with really looking at how are we thinking about the things we're asking for and what are the words that we're using. Excellence is it's a word I have a really hard time with, because it doesn't mean anything, but it's a little bit one of those words, I think, particularly in the arts, that refers to, I think when people think of excellence in dance, they typically think of ballet, for example. Ballet is fantastic. Nothing wrong with ballet. But there are other forms of dance that are also excellent. And so what the heck does excellence mean? So we've really tried to get some of these words that are complicated out of our postings and to really talk about what do we need people to know and be able to do when they come here. So that has meant that we've been able to attract people who are looking for colleagues that are asking hard questions and digging deeply into things. I was lucky enough to get to chair it was a multi-tiered search committee when we were hiring our arts and AI faculty. And it was multi-tiered because we put out an open call for arts and AI faculty. And it was so fantastic to work. And so each of the faculty representatives on that committee then went on to chair like mini committees in their units to make sure that if we had someone come in for music, that they could be properly evaluated by music and not just by the central committee, which would be inappropriate and not okay. And so that was absolutely fantastic to see the faculty really dig into the language and say, okay, what are we looking for? What do we need people to be able to be and do? And to really interrogate the language in the posting to make sure that it was rich enough to attract a really broad spectrum of thinkers and artists and designers, and to also make it really clear that we were also asking questions and learning along the way. And so that one stands out to me as one that was like the perfect example of what happens when you have a job posting with a really open mind. And we set out to search for 2 people, and we ended up hiring 4 because our 4 finalists were all so fantastic, and we were able to, work things out. We had an empty position at the time, and we were able to hire 4. But I think also we take very seriously, as I think does just about everybody at UF, the steps along the way, right? With who are they meeting with? Making sure that the communication is really, really good. Sometimes it's the little things, right? Hey, there's a candidate coming in. Let me make sure that I get you the information about when all these visits are so that you, busy faculty member, busy staff member, can put this in your calendar in advance and have it come in a form that's digestible to you instead of an Outlook invite, which might make no sense to you. So it's a little bit the administration of the searches, but a lot of it is just making people really think about what language are you using when you are asking people to apply. What's your language right there? And that I think has made the biggest difference. I still review the dean still reviews all search postings before they go live. Even though at this point, to some degree, it's not 100% necessary, but I think it's still a useful check and balance to just say, like, hang on, has any of that very comfortable, historical language crept back in? And if so, why is it there?
Oh, excellent. Well, Jen, thinking about hiring
Yeah.
and also student recruitment, the issue of diversity has become a really hot button issue, not just in Florida, but all across the country. Can you talk about how you've approached this issue of diversity and also, I guess, connected to that is you did a really excellent job earlier in the interview talking about, not all of us come into faculty positions
Right.
or student positions with equal access to academic culture, right?
Right. I think the two ways of approaching it, I think in terms of hiring and in terms of students are a little bit different, but in some ways connected, right? I think, first of all, representation matters. And so if you want to make sure that first generation students feel really comfortable coming to the University of Florida, it really helps to have somebody who is themselves a first generation student or was a first generation student talking to those young people in high school, right? Like they don't want to talk to me. They don't want to talk to the person who comes from a family of people with PhDs because that's not their lived experience. And so you have to meet people where they are and understand what are the things that both they and their parents might need to know in order to have them come to the University of Florida. Some of it also has just been around thinking about whose stories are we telling on the stage, in the classroom, whose work is performed, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the ways that people approach diversity end up being very numerical, which doesn't necessarily work out real well in the end. Whereas at the end of the day, if you are looking at, if a student comes to the University of Florida and they don't ever see themselves reflected in the work that's happening here, whoever that student is, they're not going to feel welcome, right? They're not going to feel like they belong because they don't see their story. They don't see themselves as having a place here. And so that has been something that's been really interesting to watch as our units have really begun to hear more from their students and to listen really deeply to their students about what are the stories that we're not telling? Who gets to be performed? Whose work is taught in our classrooms? And that, I think, in some ways has been one of the most important things. I think the launch of the new music business and entrepreneurship degree is going to be fantastic because it's going to bring a whole new group of students. Understandably, the primary focus of the audition process right now for the School of Music, not exclusively, is mostly Western art music. Not every student has access to learning Western art music as a young person, but okay, music business and entrepreneurship, you're bringing in students with a more non-traditional music background. Now they have access. And so you really have to think about not just how do I change my numbers, because that's not a game we're going to be able to play anymore. Everybody's made it very clear, like that's not, and it's not a good game. What you want to do is say, again, who do we make welcome? Who are we listening to? How are we making sure that our systems are clear, transparent, written down in places everyone can find them? Because a policy is not a policy until it's written down. It's just not. And how do you really help people feel like they belong here at UF? And I think that's been a lot of what the university has worked on is belonging. I think with faculty, much the same, right? How do you help prospective faculty see that you can come to the University of Florida and be successful here? And you will find a community, and we want you to find a community. And in fact, we will help you and talk to us. It's sometimes it's the little things like, I have a fantastic HR director, and she's been really digging into the search process again a little bit, looking in particular at dinners, right? Search committee dinners. And anybody that's been in a faculty line, it's a search committee dinner, I got to go do the thing, right? Is it an interview? Is it not an interview? What does it mean? And then we thought, well, what if we had this as an opportunity for the person who's coming in to bring somebody in who might tell them something that they want to know? Oh, well, that's suddenly way more interesting than like the random faculty member who was like, yeah, I can do it. It's fine. And so you have to constantly be willing to look at the things that you think you know how to do and you think are obvious and be wrong about that. Like you just have to be super comfortable with being wrong.
Yeah. Well, Jen, if you don't mind me commenting, I think there's certain ways in your professional career that allow you intellectually to make these types of arguments because, this is, your work with Luis Valdez,
Yeah.
You work with Intimate Apparel and
Yeah.
these other groundbreaking productions. It allows you, would you say, would you agree with this, that it kind of allows you to say, hey, I've been part of this movement to bring broader types of arts to audiences and not just the traditional stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been really lucky, honestly. Like, um, working with Luis Valdez is, I mean, it's life-changing, right? He's Luis Valdez, right? Um, and and he's also a tremendous family man, and his family's amazing. And and so there's this whole human side of that. But I think, I have been lucky enough to have been invited in to help tell these stories. Um, and again, I mean, you'll hear me talk about storytelling because so much of what we do is storytelling, right? And I think it's people dress it up as other things, but it is storytelling. And I think, and I do want people to understand that the stories that you put on stage really do matter. Being at the time that I was in San Diego working as a professional designer, there were the three big theaters at that time. There was the Old Globe, there was La Jolla Playhouse, and there was San Diego Repertory Theater. And San Diego Repertory Theater is where Luis Valdez worked. That's where he worked when he was in town. That was where he brought new things because that is where Zoot Suit came. And that, right, and of course it would start at El Teatro Campesino, but that when he wanted to premiere a work, he came to San Diego Repertory Theater. He didn't go to La Jolla Playhouse and he didn't go to the Old Globe. And so I spent a lot of my career working at San Diego Repertory Theater because I was so interested in these stories, right? And in the ways that he made work and the way that he thought about the impact of his work and out in the world. And so I don't know that I would say that I was part of a movement as much as I was lucky enough to be invited in to help.
Well, it was amazing to me, Jen. A few years ago, I took my wife Sheila up to New York for her 65th birthday, and we did. We went to three Broadway shows, and it was incredible to be there. I mean, this had not been planned, but this was in the wake of the Black Lives Matter resurgence.
Yep.
And you remember that there was kind of a new screening of Fences, which unfortunately we didn't get to. But and then piano lesson right after that.
Right.
But there was a whole range.
Yeah.
It just seemed like, and actually one of the performances that we attended, the performers made a statement, about the importance of understanding, social justice and theater. It was such a vibrant time. I mean, I never would have thought on Broadway you'd have so many productions that were either written by African American artists or performed, and really just amazing. So again, the connection between the society and arts and politics was really made manifest in Broadway of all places.
Yeah, it really was. And it's funny you mentioned Fences. I was lucky enough to see James Earl Jones in Fences when it was on Broadway, and it was everything you imagine, just everything you would imagine. When I was growing up, my grandmother, who lived on Long Island, knew that I was really interested in theater, and so she would do like a combined birthday and holiday present and take me to see a Broadway show with a friend of hers who lived in New York. And I was lucky enough to see some really fantastic work. They would only take me to plays because the writing wasn't as good in musicals. They had a lot of opinions. But yeah, I think again, it comes down to, who gets to tell their stories, and I think it's been really, I love watching my former students go out in the world and succeed, and some of them are teaching themselves, and you know, um, but again, being able to help a student who otherwise maybe never would have been able to do this as a career, to again be part of telling stories, teaching the next generation, paying it forward, helping somebody else has been. I miss it a little bit because I don't have time to teach anymore, but it is that, and sometimes I think it is that simple. Um, what are the stories that get told, and who gets to tell them? And pretty much every discipline should be thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I've taken just about an hour of your time. I know you're an incredibly busy person, but we got to ask just a couple more questions as we're thinking about wrapping up, and then also if there are things you want to share, as we wrap up, please let me know as well. But one of the questions, I believe that Lucinda provided us with a really nice timeline of kind of College of the Fine Arts, College of the Arts, some of the marquee um, moments. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing in your experience what some of the most important moments have been, or it could be accomplishments or productions or anything since you have been in the University of Florida for the arts. What would have been some of the really critical moments or things?
Um, Boy, it's been a wild 7 and some years. Not gonna lie, you know, but I think this is going to be super disorganized. But I will say that making it through COVID as a College of the Arts, that stands out as a pretty remarkable accomplishment. It's that was our faculty and staff were phenomenal, just phenomenal. And I think the students met them where they were again, and so that definitely stands out. I think there have been some really important curriculum changes that have happened, in particular, the launch of the DMA, which is such a unique program, having an outside cognate. I don't believe there is another DMA in the country that does what we're doing here, where you come and get a Doctor of Musical Arts, but you must take a certain number of credits in an outside discipline because it's had a huge effect on how employable our students are when they leave. They are absolutely unique. The launch of the MFA in Design and Visual Communication, which formerly had just been incorporated in the MFA Art, really the recognition that design and visual communication is a field of its own and needs to be lifted up. Probably going to hear me talk about curriculum a lot because I love curriculum. Um, I think, we make work every year, and I don't know that I would pull any individual production or exhibition out as particularly critical. Um, but I think, you know, every time we've been able to return to foregrounding student work, that has been huge. This past year, Liz Ross, who's the fantastic director of the School of Art and Art History, was able to start up the student juried exhibition again.
Hmm.
That's fantastic, right? Again, it's one more opportunity for the students to have their work seen, the BFA students in particular. Um, Gosh, there's just so many, I'm so excited about the launch of it's a Bachelor of Science in Music, Business, and Entrepreneurship in a College of the Arts, right? I think it's going to be phenomenal. I'm so excited about it. Um, Theater and dance really digging in and taking a complete overhaul of their dance curriculum in a way that took particularly the technique sequences, which despite, the history of the school and despite the things that they value, was still focused very, very heavily on ballet and modern and postmodern. And really moving technique onto a level playing field so that students need to take courses in ballet and modern and African or African diasporic dance, right? Like just recognizing that students are here to study all different kinds of technique, and they should be able to be proficient in these different ways of moving and ways of thinking about movement. Um, I got to tell you, I know we don't have it yet, but I'm so excited about the School of Music building. It's going to be big when we finally get it someday.
Now that's going to be Jen. That's across that. Is that the intersection of 13th and University, or no? No, no.
That was the old plan. At this point, it will be almost certainly an annex or a a small nearby building. We will keep the
Okay.
very interesting School of Music building. But I think it's been 20, 30 years they've been working on this. And, thanks to the great work by everybody involved in that, we actually have the funding to do it. And things are rolling and things are getting figured out. And so that is huge. Um, I think the creation of our current strategic plan, the way that it was done, engaging the community, that's been a milestone in sort of thinking about who are we as a college and whose voice gets to be heard. So yeah, there's so many things I could pick out, and again, a lot of it that is going to be colored by my lens as having been the Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs for many years.
Yes. Well, Jen, why don't we go ahead and at least for now, we'll kind of transition off. And
Paul, it was great to finally meet you after only sort of knowing of you by fantastic reputation for so many years. I'm just sorry that we didn't get to meet while we were both actually in the same space, but that's the way it goes.
Likewise, Jen. Well, but if you ever plan to come up to Ithaca, please let me know.